View B of the Primrose has a large center square. So here's the back and here's its lining. The area with the dashed lines are the areas where the lining joins to the back, so that's the seam. These open areas represent the beveled edges that are going to be built when the square is closed up. You have to stay stitch here because this will be the opening that you will use to turn the fabric to the right side after it's lined. You also have to stay stitched over here. In this case, you do not have to worry about mirror images. If you stay stitched along any one of these beveled edges, you'll be good. I want to talk about the smaller square used for the Primrose. The dashed line represents where the lining will be joined to the back. The trick is, this is so similar to where the edges will be beveled, it can be kind of confusing. That's why each pattern has these notches to represent where the stitching line is. The kind of angled area where there is no stitching line is going to be the beveled edge, and that requires stay stitching on both the back and the lining of the Primrose. Here are the 4 small square lining pieces. Each one has been stay stitched along the edge that does not have a notch on it. I've also stay stitched the backs, you can see on one side, and it's not a notched edge. And then I'm going to go ahead and join the backs to their linings. The same system that I'm using to join these together is used for the larger square. So I stay stitched the area that does not have a notch, and that will form the beveled edge. That will not be sewn as the piece is lined. It will be left open. You're going to take the back and put it face up, and then you're going to position the fleece lining so that it's face down, or the fusing agent is on the outside. So that's right sides together. Then you're going to match one of the notched edges. This notch edge will form the sash. You pin it together, and you're going to sew the back to its lining just along this long, little teeny seam. I use a 1.8 stitch length or shorter. I'm just going to sew along here. I'm going to back stitch here only where the stitching meets my stay stitching. And the reason I'm doing that is I'm going to flip the quilt right side out through the opening left here, and that's going to be under some strain, so back stitching here is important. But if you use a smaller stitch length, it's not as important here. So I'm going to take this to the machine and sew it. So this is the seam I've just sewn. This is stay stitching. None of that is sewn together, just the seam along the notched edge. Now I'm going to scoot the lining down so the raw edges match the lining in the back on the opposite side. I'm going to pin that piece together. Raw edges matching. I've got excessive back fabric there. That is what I want. And I'm going to sew the notched edge along this, the raw edge, 1/4 of an inch from the edge. When I do that, I will get this. This has way too much fabric in the back. I've got 2 sides that are sewn. I'm going to move the back so that the raw edges match the lining. Pin that together and sew this line. When that's done, I'll have 3 sides sewn, and I simply match the remaining notched edge. Now, these edges are not always going to be notched because sometimes it's obvious which edges are the beveled edges. But with a small square, it's difficult to tell. So that's why these edges are notched for now. So I'm going to sew this remaining seam. And when I'm done, I'll have stitches along all 4 notched edges. And the areas that are going to be the beveled edges when I'm done building my quilt block are left open and unsewn. That's how it looks from the lining side. All 5 of the squares required for the Primrose table topper have their linings sewn to their backs, so you can see the stitching lines and you can see all the beveled edges are left open, and the backs are way too big for the front lining. So this is the large square. I didn't show that being constructed, but the construction's the same as for the smaller squares. I only have one of the 4 small squares here to show you the next step. And I also have the large square that's going to go in the middle. After the lining has been sewn to the back, you're going to end up with a very puffy back, and the lining is going to be flat. Now's the time that you trim the lining, if it's a non-woven material. So you trim the area just above the stitching lines. You don't have to trim anywhere else. You trim it to approximately half its original width. All I have to do is continue going around trimming. Do not trim the fabric. This is a non-woven. It will not unravel, and it's safe to trim it to a very narrow width. So I'm going to turn off the camera and finish trimming them all. After the pieces have been trimmed, it's time to turn them to the right side. Remember, the fusing agent is on the outside. You can feel it. It feels like sandpaper. Start at the side of each square or rectangle where the stay stitching is placed and force the fabric through that. Sometimes these are super easy to turn. The smaller ones are really quick and easy. The larger one might require just a little more work. So this is turned and ready to be pressed. Now this piece, I'm going to start at the stay stitched edge, force my fabric through, and almost as soon as some of it goes through, then I take the remaining fabric, twist it into a tight column, and try and gently pull the stay stitched edge over that column. That's how I can get a lot of fabric through that small opening and turn this piece right side out. Okay, now it's time to fuse these pieces so that the fusing agent is activated. And I show you that when I show you the octagon piece, so I'm not going to review that right now. It's just using a hot iron, pressing this, and making sure the fusing agent sticks to the back.